Coming up on this Friday edition of Newsline at noon, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's controversial war shrine visit underlines his determination to make Japan a more powerful nation, but at the price of souring ties with its allies and neighbours. After talks to reach a compromise fail, the state-run rail operator KORail urges the union to end its 19-day strike, warning those not returning to work by midnight Friday will face disciplinary measures. The union says KORail must first abandon a plan to issue a licence for an affiliate. Plus, forecasting 3.9% growth next year, the Korean government outlines its economic goals for 2014, which includes creating new jobs and boosting domestic demand. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. We begin with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's very controversial visit to a war shrine that honours Japan's war dead, including several Class A war criminals.
His surprise move has infuriated Japan's neighbours, including Korea, which lodged a strong complaint. Our Han Da-eun reports.
Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe marked the anniversary of his first year in office by visiting the Yasukuni War Shrine in Tokyo on Thursday morning. It's the first time a sitting prime minister has visited the controversial site since Junichiro Koizumi's visit in 2006. The Yasukuni Shrine honors 2.5 million Japanese war dead, including some convicted war criminals. Abe had previously steered clear of the shrine for fear of further damaging regional ties, choosing instead to send donations. But the possibility of a visit has always lingered due to the Prime Minister's strong nationalism and hawkish foreign policies. Abe told reporters on his way out that he was paying respects to those who sacrificed their lives for Japan and that he had no intention of upsetting the people of Korea or China. He added that he hoped to have a chance to explain his actions to the leaders of both neighboring countries. Korea's Culture Minister Yoo Jin-yong called Abe's behavior anachronistic.
The Korean government can't help but express deep regret and anger over Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit, defying concerns from neighboring countries. The Yasukuni Shrine harbors war criminals and eulogizes Japan's imperialism.
Yu added Japan should acknowledge its past wrongdoing and build trust with its neighbors, starting with a sincere apology. Korean Vice Foreign Minister Kim Kyu-hyun summoned Takashi Kurai, the deputy chief of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, to relay Seoul's concerns. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
Prime Minister Abe's visit to the Yasukuni Shrine has also deeply upset countries like China and the United States. And for more on the international reaction to Abe's visit, here's our Shin Se-min.
China and the U.S. have let their feelings be known about Prime Minister Abe's visit to the Yasukuni Shrine. China, one of the major victims of Japan's wartime aggression, strongly condemned the visit, saying it glorified Japan's history of militaristic aggression.
What Abe has done is taking Japan to a dangerous direction. Lessons must be learned from history. The international community, including China, should step up their vigilance and not allow Japan to retrace its historical steps.
The United States, one of Japan's closest allies, feels especially let down as Abe clearly ignored Secretary of State John Kerry and Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel's advice during their visit to Japan in October to avoid visiting the war shrine. Reiterating sentiments expressed by the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, the State Department said Washington was disappointed Abe had taken an action which would clearly have severe diplomatic consequences. Taiwan, once a Japanese colony, condemned Abe's visit, urging Tokyo to face facts and remember the lessons from history. Abe's visit has certainly pleased his conservative supporters at home, but it has undoubtedly worsened Tokyo's relations with its neighbors and its most important ally, the United States. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
As we mentioned, Prime Minister Abe's highly political visit to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine on Thursday is expected to escalate tensions in East Asia. So what are some reasons behind Abe's visit? Kim Hyun-bin tells us more.
Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's deeply political visit to the Yasukuni Shrine is stirring diplomatic uproars among Japan's allies and neighbors. Of the 2.4 million war dead enshrined within the temple, 14 are Class A war criminals. These men were found guilty of overseeing the killing of millions of civilians during the World War II, using chemical warfare and ordering the systematic use of rape as a weapon. So why did Abe visit the shrine? Political scientists believe nationalist Abe's visit underscores two of his main political agendas: improving his popularity at home and making Japan what he calls a normal country. Experts say by paying his respects at the Yasukuni Shrine, he can win back a lot of right-wing support. His approval rate has tumbled over 70% at the beginning of the year to under 50% this month. Some experts say Abe plans to radically revise Japan's post-war peace constitution, a dream that started with his grandfather in the 1950s. Abe has a strong military family background. Abe's grandfather served in the war cabinet during the war and was arrested on suspicion of being a Class A criminal, but no charges were ever brought. The peace constitution is resented by many right-wing Japanese, who believe the constitution was forced on Japan by the U.S. and is a source of great humiliation. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Moving now to the nationwide rail strike, now in its 19th day. Marathon talks between the state-run railway operator KORail and the railway union to resolve the strike failed overnight to make much progress. Song Ji-son has the latest.
The KORail chief issued an ultimatum to striking workers on Friday after the labor and management of the state-run rail operator failed to reach an agreement in talks that went for 10 hours on and off and ended Friday morning. In a press briefing Friday morning, KORail CEO Choi asked striking workers to return to work by midnight Friday or face disciplinary action. She added that KORail aims to foster internal competition by setting up a subsidiary to manage a new high-speed rail line out of Seoul, which is what sparked the strike on December 9th.
We can give you a 100% guarantee the new Susa KTX station will be an affiliate of the company. We ask all workers to come back by midnight, and for those who do not, we will consider that you're not willing to return to your posts.
In a separate press conference shortly after, Railway Union leader Kim Myung-hwan said the union is still open to talks and workers would end the strike if the government stops the approval of a license for the new subsidiary.
We're willing to go back to work once the government stops proceeding with the new Susa KTX station, and we're willing to sit down for talks on development of the railway to benefit society.
KORail said Thursday it would hire 660 new employees to mitigate the strike's impact. Passenger train services are running at about 70%, while freight train services have tumbled to around 30% of regular levels. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
The Korean government says it wants the private sector to play a leading role in spurring economic growth next year. The government expects the Korean economy to expand by 3.9% in 2014, up from 2.8% estimated for this year. Hwang Jie has the details.
Boosting domestic demand, job creation, and reforming the public sector. Those are the main economic objectives of the Korean government for 2014. Unveiling its economic policies for next year on Friday, the government pledged to promote investment and consumption by fostering the nation's service sector and providing tax breaks for small and medium-sized businesses. The government says while many ordinary people could not feel the benefits from record exports this year, increased domestic activities next year will improve their livelihoods. To keep up with the momentum of recovery, fiscal spending will be front-loaded in the first half of the year. The government will place an emphasis on job creation in 2014 when it expects some 450,000 new jobs to be created. The government in particular will step up efforts to boost employment among young people and women. It'll set up a venture capital fund only for young entrepreneurs and offer incentives to create more flexible part-time jobs for female workers seeking to juggle work and home life. Also high up on the government's priority list will be debt reduction for state-run companies and public organizations and so-called economic democratization, calling for a more equitable distribution of wealth and the reining in of family-controlled conglomerates that now dominate the industrial landscape. If things pan out as the government plans, the domestic economy will grow 3.9% next year, higher than the International Monetary Fund's forecast of 3.6%. A rise in domestic demand, however, is expected to narrow the nation's current account surplus to $49 billion next year from $70 billion this year. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has called on her top economic officials to continue their focus on economic revitalization next year. In a meeting with her economy-related ministers on Friday, President Park stressed the key to boosting the domestic economy is easing regulations on the country's 5 major service industries: health, education, tourism, finance and software, and on foreign investment. In particular, she emphasized the importance of fostering the service industry as the sector is a source of new jobs and strengthening the country's economic fundamentals when put together with the manufacturing industry. She also asked the ministers to do their best in supporting small and mid-sized firms and revitalizing the local economy.
Business sentiment among manufacturers in Korea has dropped for the second straight month amid sluggish domestic demand. The Bank of Korea says the business survey index for the month of December came in at 76, down 2 points from the previous month. A reading below the benchmark 100 means pessimists outnumber optimists. However, local manufacturers had a more positive outlook for next year, reflecting their optimism about the current pace of economic recovery. The central bank also said the index measuring manufacturers' outlook on business conditions for 2014 inched up 10 points from this year to 88. Prosecutors have demanded a 9-year jail sentence for Hanwha Group chairman Kim Seung-yeon for embezzlement and breach of trust. The prosecutors also sought a $142 million fine for the controversial Hanwha chief in court on Thursday, which Kim deposited that afternoon. Kim is accused of inflicting twice the amount of damage to the company as the amount of the fine. Prosecutors say he used company assets and sold shares of its affiliates to members of his family at below market prices to pay back the debts of affiliates he was operating under borrowed names. The final session of the trial is scheduled for February 6, 2014.
For your fill of Korean and international news, join Choi, Yu-sun, and Mark Broome every weekday at lunchtime. NEWSLINE at noon.
Session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
The resurgence of anti-government protests in Thailand has prompted the country's election watchdog to urge the government to postpone an election schedule for February in time to find a peaceful resolution to the unrest. Kwon So-ah has the latest.
After 2 weeks of relative calm, the anti-government protests in Thailand erupted again on Thursday, when nearly 2,000 protesters clashed with police in the capital of Bangkok, resulting in the death of 1 policeman and over 100 people injured. The clashes began as demonstrators tried to storm a stadium facilitating pre-registration for next year's election set for February 2nd. Some protesters threw stones while police fired tear gas. The re-escalation of violence and concerns about the safety of the candidates prompted the National Election Commission to ask the government to delay the snap election Prime Minister Shinawatra had called for earlier this month.
We've asked the government to postpone the election until we can come to an understanding and reach mutual consent on creating a peaceful society before the election.
The government, however, firmly rejected the call.
February 2nd, 2014 is mentioned in the Parliament Dissolution Act. There is no law in the Constitution that gives the government the power to postpone the election date.
Current Prime Minister Shinzo had said she would step down from office if that is what the people want. But protesters are still demanding her ouster, saying she is her brother's puppet. Elections have been won by parties connected to Yingnuck's brother Thaksin Shinawatra since 2001. Thaksin was ousted in a military coup in 2006 and has since lived in self-imposed exile. The recent protests have been stirred by an attempt by Yingnuck's government to pass an amnesty bill that would have allowed Thaksin to return to his homeland. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
The United Nations has again called on rival forces in crisis-hit South Sudan to lay down their arms. The plea came Thursday as South Sudan's President Salva Kiir met the presidents of Kenya and Ethiopia in an attempt to defuse the intensifying conflict. Clashes were first reported 11 days ago between forces loyal to the president and those backing his ex-vice president. The UN Special Representative for South Sudan has called on the two warring factions to give peace a chance, saying the nation that was painstakingly built over decades of conflict is at stake now. The South Sudan government says rebels have seized some oil wells and captured half of the capital of the main oil-producing region. Dozens of supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood have been scooped up by security forces in Egypt less than a day after the military-backed interim government declared the Islamist group a terrorist organization. The government has warned that anyone holding a leadership post in the Brotherhood could be sentenced to death under the new designation. Unrest is growing in Egypt. On Thursday, 5 people were seriously injured by a bomb that exploded close to a bus in Cairo. And earlier this week, a suicide bomb targeting a police headquarters near Cairo killed 16 and injured at least 140. Government officials blame the Brotherhood for the bombing and a claim the Islamist group denies. The Egyptian government has vowed to jail demonstrators who take part in protests organized by the Muslim Brotherhood for up to 5 years.
The sprawling corruption scandal in Turkey is unraveling fast. The Turkish government has now relieved the investigating prosecutor of his duties after he complained that his efforts were being blocked by the police. 3 ministers had resigned after their sons were among dozens of people detained last week as part of a probe into allegations of illegal money transfers to Iran and bribery for construction projects. Under fire, Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan is battening down the hatches, replacing half his cabinet with loyalists. One of Erdogan's closest allies has called the investigation a foreign orchestrated plot without legal merit. Korea's 2 leading automakers, Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, are forecast to produce a combined 4 million vehicles at their overseas plants for the first time this year. The Korea Automobile Manufacturers Association says that the combined total rose nearly 14% to 3.8 million units in the January to November period from last year. This means Hyundai and Kia are on course to top the 4 million mark before the year is out. Market watchers attribute the growth to Hyundai's plant operation in Brazil, which started in November of last year, along with its 3rd Chinese plant that produces 400,000 units annually. Hyundai Motor says it plans to start operating its plant in Turkey at full capacity next year to manufacture its newest i20 model, which targets the European market. Thousands of people could be wasting their time and money on a common type of knee surgery that a new study suggests may be no better than a fake procedure. Our Kim Min-ji has the details.
A new study has shown that a common surgical procedure to repair torn cartilage may be no more effective than a sham procedure. The study, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, examined the effects of a surgical procedure to treat a torn meniscus, the cartilage that helps support the knee. The surgery, called arthroscopic partial meniscectomy, requires doctors to make 2 small holes on either side of the knee, one for a tiny camera and the other for surgical instruments.
The researchers from Helsinki University in Finland divided 146 people between the ages of 35 and 65 into two groups that were either given arthroscopic surgery or a sham surgery. After a year, the researchers found no great difference in the patient's knee pain. The study, meanwhile, drew mixed reactions from the United States. A doctor at the University of Maryland Medical Center said that the findings should not be overgeneralized, adding that even the sham surgery has potential benefits because the action taken to perform the procedure may provide some relief, even if the actual problem is not addressed. However, a professor of medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston said the meniscal surgery can provide some relief, but the effects of the surgery are short-lived. In the U.S., around 700,000 people undergo meniscal surgery each year, which amounts to some $4 billion in medical costs. The new study could cause doctors and patients to think twice before proceeding with the procedure in the future. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Okay, well, it was certainly a lot chillier this morning when I got up to come to work, but let's get a check on the weather for today and hopefully the weekend too, so we can make some plans with our Jian, who's standing by at the Weather Center. Hello, Jian.
A happy Friday, Mark and Yusan. Well, winter sports season is at its peak at this time of the year, and skiers and boarders have been busy enjoying themselves.
Well, you know, you can actually, many people actually get a sunburn while skiing or snowboarding.
Yeah. That's right, Yusan. And the sun is reflected by the bright white snow, and the sunlight on the mountain can be stronger than on a beach in the summer. So experts recommend that we use a sunscreen that's over sun protection factor 50 and keep reapplying every 2 hours when you're out on the slopes. But today shouldn't be a good day for skiing, as the country is getting a blast of frigid temperatures. The high in Seoul will only get up to about -2, so be sure to dress in layers before heading out and cover up from head to toe. But we will have lots of sunshine across the nation throughout the day, but with the strong gusty winds, we won't get much relief from the cold. And tomorrow, we will have a morning low of -9 here in Seoul, so it's gonna be colder than today. And it looks like the cold snap will continue throughout the weekend under mostly sunny skies, but some areas down south could receive some icy rain on Saturday. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. The afternoon high in Seoul will only climb to -2, while Daegu and Gwangju have a high of 4 and 2 respectively, and Busan will get up to 6 under lots of sunshine. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju should see a high of 4 in the afternoon. Daejeon and Dokdo will reach at 1 and 0 respectively, and the top temperature on Mount Kumgang will be only -9. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. That's all for me this week. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. And back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Thank you very much, Jian. Have a wonderful weekend yourself. And that does it for this Friday edition of Newsline at Noon.
Join us again next Monday here in Seoul.